Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Brian. We're going to do a special selection today, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's selection comes at us from John. No context, just ISTAPP, and the name of the song, which I'm not going to butcher, but you can see it right there. Let's dive into this. See what ISTAPP is bringing to the table today. Love the harmonies. Really interesting riff too, as far as key notes are going. There's little embellishing elements. There's also what was that cymbal thing? There's also like a little bit of Baroque influence in that chorus. I was gonna say, this is a bit, we'll see where this goes. I like that bass out. Very nice layering right here. So good. Yeah. Okay. I don't usually have those types of reactions to black metal. This is very cool. The verses are less enjoyable for me, but the chorus is really nice. And I love the juxtaposition between the single note quickly played tremolo picking. Is that? I don't think I heard a steady rhythm to it. It might have been 16th notes. Um, just that constant drive, and then these suspended harmonies. I love that contrast right there. It's just a beautiful section, um, and just the harmonies are really great. Having the higher pitched vocal come in on the second line and just really belt up there on the second half of that line, and stay up there for the remainder of the section before we repeat it. Just great. And especially on the second repetition when we get the third vocalist in, who comes in on the lower end and gives us this really nice stack. These beautiful triads. It really is gorgeous writing. Like I said, there's a hint of Baroque inspiration there as well, and I kind of heard it in the verse as well, with those little embellishments and specific note choices. But to me, it's really prevalent, or I should say, it's more prevalent because it's not a huge aspect of it. It's not like they're writing Baroque music for guitars, but there is some inspiration in there that's more easily seen in the chorus. It's also really nice to hear the bass in a black metal song. It really wasn't doing too much different than the guitars until we get to the end, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's just really nice to hear some bass presence in a black metal track. The verse. So I want to bring up the verse because I find this to be very interesting. It's black metal, lots of fast picking, staying on a single note, but it's done so with embellishment here, which I think is very cool. We have one guitar that stays on the ba, and then we have another one that goes ba 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 ba, something like that. And it's just very cool to have basically a melody line sitting above this. It's really only the first bar of the second repetition. So assuming it's a 4 bar phrase, we're looking at bar 3 that does this. The other bars though have smaller embellishments. I think bar 2 doesn't have any embellishment. Bar 4 has a single note that dips down to help lead back into our resolution and the restart of the phrase. But it's really neat to hear all this movement and melody. And of course, the two guitars are doing two different things. We have not necessarily counterpoint, but a baseline, a foundation, a root that kind of anchors us to this home area while the other guitar kind of moves around, and we can feel the distance between the home of the chord and where we are, where we're going, and feel a distance between those two, which is just very cool. Um, and then the bass is kind of doing its thing. Occasionally, it's playing along with something similar to what one of the guitars are doing, but the neat thing is that it's clearly heard. You can hear just the sound of it. It has a nice, warm, round sound that exists outside of the guitars. And this kind of takes me over to the production side, because this is what happens, I think, most often with black metal, is that the production kind of compresses everything down to where the bass is hidden underneath the guitar. Even if they're doing different things, it's just hard to hear it underneath what the guitars are doing, what the vocals are doing, the drums are doing. And so not only does it allow the bass to have its own presence, its own space in the song, but it also isn't blackened. As I've mentioned before, black metal to me is kind of more of a texture, and this song interestingly pushes against that pretty hard. where, well, it's missing the black metal sound. It's not overly compressed. There's not a ton of fuzz on it, but it's still very much black metal to me, which means there is a compositional aspect to it, or maybe more of an invisible production aspect that I don't know that I'm picking up. Maybe I don't know how to put into words, but it's definitely more than the surface level stuff that I've attributed it to the past, which is pretty much thrash metal with a ton of distortion and fuzz on it. So, anyways, though, past all that, this is not black metal, not production wise. It's very clear. And maybe this is hi-fi black metal. I don't know. I've heard some hi-fi black metal, but it still has that oomph to it, that width, that wall of sound almost. And this doesn't. This is very clear. Each instrument has its own placement. I would say the only thing that is very black metal to me is the the drums. They are a bit raw and not gritty. They're muddy. The bass kicks are not individually heard. You just kind of get this rumble underneath. So the cymbals are very clear, and there's some very cool cymbal work. But everything on the lower end is just sort of bleh, it's just there and just kind of bleeds over into everything else on the low end as far as the drums concerned. Mostly the toms and the bass kick. The snare has clarity to it, but it doesn't have that crack that you would associate with the snare hit. It's a bit more muted. And the whole drums just kind of feel compressed in that way, crunched down. Hmm. But the bass isn't. The bass is on the lower end, but has clarity. Interesting. That's a purposeful choice. That isn't just doing a song wide EQing and not giving enough space to the low end. That's purpose driven. The low end on the drums is different than the low end on the bass. Huh. Yeah, I don't really know how to feel about that other than just observing it, listening to it. Interesting decision. And this brings us to our vocals. And I mentioned I love the cleans, not too hot on the harshes. This is pretty much what I think of when I think of that stereotypical black metal vocal. It's a bit more nasally. It's kind of pushed up into whatever this is, the nasal cavity, the upper palate. I don't know. And it's a bit more narrow and pointed. It doesn't have the full width of like a metalcore harsh or like a growl. Um, and it's in quite stark contrast to the very wide, layered harmonies that we get out of the clean vocals in the chorus. Again, nothing to really mention other than just mentioning the contrast of it. There's nothing about it that stands out to me. It's pretty typical for the genre, and it's not my cup of tea. But all of this brings me to what I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of the track, other than just being blown away by the chorus, which not what I was expecting at all given the music. Our outro, our final minute or so of very Baroque styled melodic layering. We have one guitar playing a lead melody line, another guitar playing a foundational melody line. If I remember right, it wasn't just a series of chords. There was movement to it, but it was more focused on chords, whereas our lead guitar is more focused on notes, on melody. And then our bass playing an entirely different melody. And this is just very like standard basic Baroque layering technique, and it's just so cool to hear it here. But it also just goes to show that this band knows what they're doing, because it's the same technique written in a different way that we had earlier with some of the lines we heard in the verse. And the note choices from the chorus also kind of push, like I said, into that Baroque influence as well. And it just showcases that this isn't a band just playing around with notes. They seem to know what they're doing. They're achieving a very specific sound that, while, as I mentioned earlier, is not Baroque in nature does borrow and is influenced by somebody in this understands or at least listens to and wants to emulate classical music. And that's very cool. I try not to attribute specific ideas to genres, but black metal, in my mind, and I'm going to catch some flack for this probably, is maybe it's just the black metal I've been introduced to. It is a simple metal. It's about playing fast, where precision isn't necessarily a necessary component because the fuzz can cover it up. And it's mostly about playing one notes. You know, a lot of this time I've mentioned that if you just remove the tremolo picking or the 16th note picking that these guitarists are doing and decide to just pick a note, you kind of see where it really is just a series of whole notes and they're just playing them very quickly. They're adding additional attacks to it. Um, so it's like I said, I try not to look down on any genres or attribute anything like this to them, but when someone says, "Hey, I'm going to show you black metal," mentally to prepare for that, I'm ready to listen to something more on the simple side. And if I get something a little more progressive, well, now I'm just blown away by it. Kind of like what happened here. Um, and it's just really cool to hear something with a bit more depth to it in this style. And the clarity of the production helps a ton as well. It is something that I always ask for in black metal. The one thing that really makes it difficult for me to talk about songs that I have trouble hearing them. And this song fixes a lot of that in the production side. So, and then goes for clean vocals too. I mean, it really is everything that I would want out of a black metal song to make it a little more palatable and listenable for me. All right, I think that's pretty much everything. Going to hit some lyrics right here. Actually, I've already read over them, so I'm not even going to worry about pausing this to go read them because I'm just going to dive right into this. So this was a translation from someone in the community. It is a direct translation, a literal translation. So I am going to be interpreting some of these lines a little bit more colloquially, but I really appreciate that it is literal. It allows me to take more of a figurative translation from them that I think works best in my reading, rather than having someone else give a bit of a loose translation that they think is more accurate. Um, but the song is about 7 kids back in 1888, which is where the number in the title comes from, who were on a, what did they say? They were on a prayer meeting on one island of Sunskar. Hope I said that right. Um, and they were going to another island, I guess back home, Vidinge. And on the way there, while walking on frozen water, I think that's what it said. Yeah, they were walking on the ice between the islands. There was a snowstorm, and all 7 kids were lost in it. Pretty heavy topic. In fact, those voices that we heard close to the end were kids saying help and I'm scared and stuff like that. Um, but the lyrics are pretty straightforward. No one's going to go anywhere. No one's coming home. On the ice, they'll freeze to death. There's a whipping storm, uh, and the way home ends in disaster. Now, what I really like, though, is one line I really want to touch on. It says, "An encounter with the god of lies cradles them in safety." I really love that line. And maybe it's a regional or a cultural thing. I'm not sure if God of Lies refers to a specific god in the culture or if it's just a way of saying that uh, some entity that might have given them rest or comfort was lying to them, like a conscience or something, that inner voice that says everything's going to be fine. But I really like that blurriness too, and part of that comes from my own ignorance on the topic as well. So maybe that blurriness isn't there, and it's specifically referring to a god of lies, a very specific god in their pantheon. But I like that. It says cradles them in safety. Here's the thing though, is that musically, I don't get any of this. Um, the chorus kind of. I can feel some of that. Well, no, because like once the higher pitched vocals come in, it just sounds, I don't want to say joyous, but powerful. And maybe it's the personification of the storm itself or how fragile life can be or something like that. But this is a massively grim and tragic event, and the music is neither of those. And as we've talked about in the past, it doesn't have to be. There's sad songs written to happy music all the time. And I don't want to accuse the band of anything. I don't want to say that they're making light of a topic, but that's what I get out of this. Especially once we hit one of the final sections and we had our guitarist on stage right. Sorry. All right, we had our guitarist on stage right. Sorry again. That introduced the new rhythm that would take us into our outro. And it kind of had this gallop in it, this energy, this pushing forward, and just felt very hopeful, energetic, bright, and it was done right before coming back to the chorus, which says, "No one's coming home, they're dead on the ice." And I would love to hear their interpretation for this, how they came to choose this music specifically for the lyrics, if they did it at all. I've talked about this so many times in the past. Sometimes you just write some killer riffs and your lyricist writes some song, and then that's just what gets put together, right? They're not necessarily developed hand in hand to go perfectly with each other. And that may happen here. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a little unfortunate. But that's also just my interpretation. Like I said, they may have something entirely different in mind. I prefer my sad songs to be written to sad music. I like that synergy. But as someone else told me, it's some cultures have this concept of dancing through the pain. And that's something that never even crossed my mind. So it's very possible that there is some connection here that I'm not seeing, just because it's not something I understand or something that I've had in my experience or my culture or anything like that. Anyways, those are my thoughts on this track by ISTAPP. I wish I could pronounce it, um, but I don't want to butcher it, especially now that I know the subject of it. This is where you guys come in, though. Hit me up with your thoughts, your comments, your ideas. If you agree with me, anything you'd like to add on to what I said, even just if you want to let me know if you enjoyed it or not. Put those thoughts down in the comments section. Above that, there's a description box, and then there's a link for Linktree. You click on that, it'll take you to this place right here. Pretty cool. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can check out the music I've written. You can find a link to the Discord community. You can find ways to support the channel and so much more. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. We have another special selection for today. If that doesn't interest you, well, tomorrow probably won't either. That's a weird way to go about trying to get people to come back. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual, we'll be returning and checking out 2 more special selections. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.